Okay. So thank you, Spencer, for joining it. Or do you go by Spence or Spencer?
Spence is fine. Yeah.
Spence. Okay. Well, thank you, Spence, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. So the first question here is, have you ever been discriminated against?
Um, it's kind of a tough question. I feel like besides, just like the offhand, like maybe racial slurs here and that, I don't know, maybe discriminated more, underestimated or just kind of um, something more along those lines. I think I've been very fortunate to not experience, um, discrimination out front, but maybe some underlying things. So,
Did you say that you have been called racial slurs before?
yeah, just kind of offhand, spur of the moment things, but nothing really a repeat offense that I can really go to. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. And so the next question is, you brought up being underestimated. So do you feel like you were ever underestimated? Do you feel like you were ever underestimated at school or at work or anything else you've done?
I think so. I think sometimes going into like the school sense or the work sense, um, for certain positions that you apply to, people kind of have this unconscious idea, unconscious or conscious maybe, but this idea of what this position should look like. Um, things like leadership positions and such. I think sometimes uh, my appearance might have come into play on that. Not to say that the other candidates weren't good, but I think that I was kind of on the back foot on that sense because I don't think I have the traits that kind of make me look into a natural leader. So I think I've noticed a few times where I've never gotten the job on the first try, but after a period of time where I can prove myself and things like that, when the job opens up again, I think I have a better chance and usually get the job. So I think in that sense, kind of underestimation kind of comes into play.
So you mentioned how you feel like for leadership positions, for example, that you feel like with your appearance, you may not have been chosen at first for that. I had another interview. We kind of say the same thing where she felt that because she's Asian, she kind of and a female. I think she said that out onto it as well. That she felt like she was considered for a leadership position or least likely to be considered for it. So my question for you is, how did that make you feel, knowing there's that possibility that you were not considered for a leadership position because of how you look?
Um, it's tough because I feel like I'm pretty optimistic. I think I'd really like to think that I didn't get the position because I wasn't as qualified as the other candidates. But the more that I kind of see what's going around in the world and um, kind of the overlying events that kind of come into play, I think maybe this could be a factor that's holding me back. So um, it feels like I have to work maybe twice as hard. It feels like I need to make myself a cut above everybody just to kind of get myself on that even playing field. So kind of starting off on the back foot maybe, but more really just an incentive to work harder for me.
Yeah. And like you said about working twice as hard, that's actually, as you know, like the main topic of this whole project. And so I was going to ask you if you felt that if you have in the past or you currently feel that you have to work twice as hard compared to your white peers, whether that be at school or at work.
I think so. I think a lot of times um, there's always some situation where you uh, kind of start on the back foot, I guess, just to use that term again. I think sometimes things are kind of expected of you, just because of your background and your stature in society. So sometimes uh, your actions and your accomplishments can be downplayed just because of who you are. And so in order to make yourself, to cut above the competition and to kind of prove to uh, whoever you're trying to prove to that you are, a step above, I think there is a motivation to work twice as hard. Yes.
Yeah, of course. So, have you ever worried about being stereotyped by your peers for having certain likes or interests, whether that be what kind of music you listen to, what you wear, or what you like to watch on TV or film?
Um, Fortunately, no. I don't think I have that problem. I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of people that kind of respect who I am. So I'm very thankful to have that. But I definitely know some other people who are not as lucky as me that probably do have that problem.
So the next question is, how has the pandemic affected you, whether that be school-wise, work-wise, or your personal life?
Well, pandemic's been pretty tough, I'll be honest, just for everybody. Um, I've been once again very fortunate not to have uh, taken the worst of the pandemic with me, but I think I've just kind of tried to find a little more discipline in myself. Um, with the surplus of time, I think now because I have all this time, and I remembered back before I had the time, I was like, man, I really wish I could do all these things, and now I do have these things. I really try not to waste my time and try to get things done. Um, Someone told me a saying the other day, discipline beats motivation, and so I'm really trying to be disciplined because there's not a lot of motivation, when you're by yourself all the time. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of that saying that you said. It's kind of like with another interview he told me. He said instead of looking at this as a pandemic, look at it as a plandemic. So
yeah,
just taking that time to like plan your future and plan things out, or like you said, get things done that you might not have had the time that you had before or didn't have before. So that's good that you've used the freer time that you've had now to do some other things. Very productive.
I try. Thank you.
My next question for you goes back to the workforce. So, do you think you have been or you might ever be underpaid for the same position as a white coworker?
Um, Fortunately, no, I don't have to worry about that. Kind of the track that I'm trying to go to, it's more based on seniority and experience. So thankfully, no, I don't have that problem.
Yeah, that's great. And okay, so according to a PBS NewsHour segment on how the pandemic has impacted college students' mental health, 75% of traditional college age students have reported poor mental health tied to the pandemic. So, do you feel like you relate to that percentage?
Once again, fortunately, no, I don't. I really have a good support group around me, so I've been very lucky throughout this pandemic to have people around me. So I have to say no to that question.
Well, that's good. So, minority stress is defined as the experiences of psychological stress or heightened physiological responses that result from chronic or acute experiences of unfair treatment and abusive behavior to one's belonging to a stigmatized minority group. So, do you feel like you might have experienced something similar to this or in general?
Um, yes, I think this is a really this question evokes a lot of strong feelings in me because there's been an issue that I've kind of been thinking about, not just lately, but throughout my life. It's kind of the idea of Asians, Asian Americans in particular, being the model minority. Um, Kind of that term being trying to label Asians as kind of like uh, the exception to the rule, I guess, in terms of minorities in America and how a lot of people see Asian Americans as finding a ways around these social barriers and such to become more successful than other minorities, which is kind of the underlying tone on that that label model minority. And so I really, after thinking about it and kind of experiencing it through firsthand experiences, I think there are two problems that kind of come with this and kind of create that underlying stress that you were talking about. The first problem, by using the term model minority, um, I think it generates a lot of strife and a big divide between Asians and other minorities. Because I think when you say the term model minority, it comes out to being like, hey, Asians are doing well. Like, why aren't other minorities doing well? And so that kind of creates like just internal strife between Asians and blacks, Hispanics, and such. And I really don't think we need that because you know there's so many ways to categorize people and such, and at the end of the day I think that really hurts because I think minorities really need to be together. So that term model minority kind of it's just another way to kind of create that tension between minorities, and so I think that could be um, that minority stress that you were talking about. And the second problem I do have with that term is uh, when I I guess with stereotypes and classifications, when you're classified as something, I think it's very easy to kind of towards that classification or kind of like validate that classification. And so, you know, growing up, always hearing this term model minority, um, some there is a lot of negative a lot of negative connotations with that word, but there's also a positive connotation because they're saying, wow, model minority, so like I can make it too, and so maybe I should fall into the model minority path. And so what I mean by that is, as a model minority, it's there's this expectation of not disrupting the status quo, not creating conflict, kind of avoiding conflict, and kind of keeping quiet about things that are going on around you, um, especially the injustice that's going on around you. And so I think, especially kind of with the older generation of Asians, especially those who immigrated, um, there's always this mentality of, keep your head down, it doesn't matter what they say, like you should just work through it and kind of just, show not tell. And even though I think that's a positive thing in a lot of ways, I think that's also negative because, racial injustices are not being spoken up about, you know, um, with a lot of the hate crimes that are happening against Asian Americans now, we're finally seeing, being quiet is probably not the best way to go about it. And I think that model minority tag that a lot of Asian Americans are under kind of create a lot of it's not good for the mental health, I guess, to kind of deal with that conflict in your head. Like, should I just stay quiet and try to, fit into this model minority, class and try to, like, make it big, or is it finally time to kind of step up? And so I think there's a lot of stress, kind of trying to fit into that term. So
Yeah, you actually hit a lot of points that I was going to get to, and which is great. Because I was also going to ask you just that you brought up the term model minority, and just I was going to ask you, how does that make you feel with what that myth comes with, and just how it characterizes Asian Americans, and just I think you really hit the nail on that one where you said it can kind of have a negative effect, even though it may not seem that way, but it just kind of like I was getting to something. Okay. So what it does, it just kind of makes it seem like, y'all are expected to be quiet and not really speak up on issues. And, like you said, that's stressful because just seeing all these hate crimes, that seems like a lot. And it seems like something you really want to feel like you should be able to speak freely about.
yeah, no, I do agree, and sometimes yeah, it's hard because we always grew up like with the mindset of, keep your head down, just work for what you have, and that's positive, um but there's only so much someone can take. So yeah, I agree.
Speaking of that mindset, I was going to ask, like I said, there's another question I was going to come up to. Do you feel like that same mindset of keeping your head down and staying quiet is the reason why mental health is a bit of a taboo topic in the Asian community?
uh I think that's a really interesting way to put it. Yeah. I could I could definitely see that. um yeah, mental health is, like you said, very taboo in Asian families, Asian communities, and I think it's only coming to light very recently. um I think that could be one of the factors. um I can't think of any other factors that could lead to it, but no, I definitely agree that um, that head down mentality could hurt mental health in the long run.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And wait, oh, what I was going to ask you is, as you brought up the Asian hate crimes that are going on. Just I wanted to know, how does that make you feel personally to see that going on?
Yeah, it really bothers me. Um, I think hate crimes in general are really bad, whether it be to Asians, to blacks, Hispanics. Um, racial equality is not just an issue that Asian Americans face at this time. Um, it it definitely strikes something in me. It really kind of fires up, especially that a lot of these attacks are kind of angled towards the elderly, I guess. And because a lot of the elderly, well, one, to attack elderly people is kind of is wrong by itself. And then to attack elderly people who would not stand up for themselves is even worse because, um, like I mentioned before, the mentality of just don't create conflict any more than it is kind of embedded in the older generation of Asians, and so it's just really sad to see anybody attacked, and it's definitely sad to see people attacked who won't fight back. So it definitely bothers me.
Well, another thing I was going to mention, it's interesting how you brought up how there's this divide between minority groups. Because of, for one, like you said, the bottom minority, there's that as well. And that was another question I was going to ask you, if you feel like there is a divide between minority groups when it comes to acknowledging the struggles that each face and just kind of seeing more of a difference in between those struggles rather than a similarity between all of us.
I got you. I'd like to start out by saying I think there's a lot of community being built between the minority groups. So it's really great to see that. Just talking about the hate attacks on Asian Americans, we've seen a lot of blacks, Hispanics, white people standing up for Asian Americans and kind of condemning all these attacks. So that's really nice to see. But unfortunately, that's not how the whole world works. I think there's a lot of discrimination going on in between minority groups, and not even just in between minority groups, but within the minority groups themselves. Even in the Asian community, with the mix of cultures and ideals and everything, there's discrimination even between ourselves. Um, and I think that's really dangerous because at the end of the day, I strongly believe that um, our cultures really aren't that different between the minorities, and I think that we're all um, trying to reach the same thing, which is equality, and all starting on the same starting line. And so to see the divide between the minority groups really is damaging to each other. And just like you said, with the model minority stereotype, that makes it even worse. So I, I definitely see examples of both, but I think it's really important to see that I think the community is coming together in some aspects, and I think we should keep trending towards that. So.
I like what you said about how our cultures are actually more similar than they are different because, as these interviews go on, I'm seeing a lot of similarities with, for example, you talked about how within these communities, sometimes they'll divide themselves up and in the Black community, that's very common. Sometimes it'll be by color, just how you grew up. I'm not so sure about the Asian community, but I'm sure there's differences. And with the Hispanic community as well, I'm sure that exists as well. And just different struggles of discrimination as well. We all these groups face some type of discrimination and racial slurs. So there's definitely a lot more that we have in common. And sometimes, thankfully, you say you've seen some people come together, but yeah, we still have a long way to go.
I agree 100% with everything you said. Yep.
Yeah. So, and then another question, I was just going to go along with the model minority myth, just asking if you feel like it kind of hides or masks the different struggles that Asian Americans do face in America. So just portraying it as kind of not so much as everything's okay, or just kind of just masking that Asian Americans do indeed face discrimination, that they do indeed have struggles.
Yeah, I do think that the model minority label definitely does mask some of the struggles that we face. Because when people think of the model minority, I think they think of, uh, the people who've made it. Um, and I think that's a very small percentage of what the community is. Um, you think of how many Asian Americans are, living in poverty or, you know, um, suffering from, you know, immigration issues, things like that. I think I couldn't tell you the statistics, but I could tell you um, that I would probably believe that most of the Asian Americans don't fit into that model minority um, label. I think we're just trying to make it like everybody else. Um, and so using that label is again once very very detrimental to um, highlighting the struggles that Asians face, because not everybody is the 1% that can, you know, that have made it, that could be classified as what people call model minority.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely has that effect. And another thing I read in an article about the model minority myth is that it also plays into that stereotype of Asians in general, being smart just because they're Asian rather than, you work hard, you study hard. So do you feel like you've ever been perceived that way as you're smart just because you're Asian and rather than, you study hard just like everybody else?
I think sometimes I've had to study even harder than my peers because I think they're smarter than me. Um, I don't think, well, at least not to my face. No one has ever told me that I'm smart just because I'm Asian, but I'm sure a lot of people have struggled with that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what some people have told me as I interviewed them. When I asked if they feel underestimated, most have said they feel overestimated, if anything, because of the stereotype that comes along with being Asian, that they feel like people just automatically assume that they're graded well math or just really any academics. But I guess suppose that's the main subject. And they just feel like people just see it as that they don't really need to study, just it's just in their DNA or genetics, I suppose.
Mm. No, I could definitely see that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thankfully, not for no one has ever told me that. I guess because they see me struggling too. But yeah, I could definitely see that being a problem.
Yeah. And not to be repetitive, but did you, growing up, did you ever have any problems with stereotypes or feeling that you had to act a certain way to avoid being stereotyped?
Mm, I I can't think of any specific examples where I've had to kind of change my personality to fit in to a certain group. I'm sure I do it, unconsciously, but no, I can't think of anything that.
That's good. I just thought to ask that because some
Yeah.
people have expressed that, or they expressed to me that they felt that they couldn't express their culture just because of how they might be perceived by others. So, and some have either, most of them have said that now they feel that they can after growing through that. But
No, actually, because you said that, that's kind of funny. I just thought of like a small example.
mhm.
I remember I used to tell my mom not to give me Asian food for lunch because it kind of smells bad, and kids aren't used to that and they kind of make fun of you. So I guess that's kind of a small one, but no, nothing on the grand scheme of things. So
Yeah, that's definitely an example just because, that's a cultural thing. And, of course, kids, they might make fun of you if you bring that to school. But yeah, so yeah, that's a bit of an example of just kind of hiding your culture to, I suppose, please others or to kind of conform.
yeah, yeah.
So have you ever felt that you were not able to, or did you feel uncomfortable about being open about your mental health to others or your peers or your family due to the cultural beliefs surrounding mental health in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. Um, I'd say yes and no, maybe. Um, I'd say as I grew up, um, in America, my parents kind of also grew up as well and kind of warmed up to the idea of mental health and things such as that. And so, uh, as I went through my middle school, high school years, really tough on the mental, I guess. My parents, actually openly talked to me about like things like that, and so they're like, like if you're having these problems, like you need to find help because they're real. And so, um, I guess to answer your question, no, in that sense, but in the community, uh, I think that's a little bit of a different topic because I think it's easier to kind of stick to what you know and your old ways in the community. And so like all those mental health, taboo questions, stuff like that, like yeah, no one really talks about them. Um, Not because maybe they don't want to talk about it, but it's just it's just another thing that it's another burden that you put on somebody else. And I think that um, the Asian community in general doesn't like to make problems. And
Yeah.
so nobody, yeah, I couldn't really see myself talking about that to like, my general Asian friends or stuff like that. But in the family sense, no, I'm once again very fortunate to be able to be open.
Yeah, listen, that's really nice that your parents were pretty open about that because I've talked to some other people who say their family wasn't as open and they kind of grew up with that like you said, mentality of just not causing any trouble or like really sharing those problems and to just kind of tough it out, stick it out.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but okay, so my last question for you is, so for anyone who sees this and watches this and feels like they can relate to some of the issues we talked about with being underestimated, or they can be open about their mental health with maybe family or friends, just anything we've talked about in general, and they might feel like, they're going through it alone. What would you have to say to them?
Um, I guess I'd like to say that, um, not to make them sound like they're not special, but there are people like you out there. Um, and even though you feel like your problems are individual, um, I have a strong feeling that the community has been through that as well. So I think there are people who are very willing to listen to you and to help you through your problems. And so I think the worst thing that you could do in that situation is to feel alone. So even with the stigma surrounding mental health, especially in the Asian community, I definitely ask them and beg them to go find help because there are people out there who are very very willing to help and could really um, give you the advice that you need to turn your life around if that's what you're looking for. So
Well, thank you so much.
yeah,
I really appreciate your time. I know you're probably busy, but I appreciate your time and you expressing your opinions and thoughts.
no, thanks for having me on. It was nice to think about all these things, so I really appreciate it. So
Yeah, of course.